Happy, and hopefully it gets happier, 2026, everybody. It's a new year with new people, new ideas, but the same video games? Tomb Raider 1, Dragon Quest 7, Gothic 1, Prince of Persia, and who knows, maybe even Max Payne 1 and 2 will be releasing this year. It's hard not to notice that a large portion of the 8th and especially 9th generation video game roster has been remakes, remasters, or remasters. With modern day AAA development taking 12 quintillion hours of slavery on top of astronomical amounts of money being poured into these big projects, more often than not, companies are re-releasing old titles with a fresh coat of paint, plastic surgery, or redoing them completely to satisfy us hungry, starving gamers, while we wait for these mysterious, possibly non-existent video games to come out. Or even get another trailer. While it may seem like this entire generation has been remakes and game developers are running out of ideas, and why are there fucking pronouns? Remakes, reimagines, and remasters have always been a prominent part of the video game market. I mean, hell, technically gaming's most iconic character is a product of a reboot. But it's kind of a cynical blanket statement to say that this entire generation is remakes, and acting like it's exclusively a modern day phenomenon is false. Even in the 1980s, remakes happened all the time, not because these video games catered to a nostalgic crowd and needed a new audience, but because games were often programmed to be run on one specific machine. So when new systems were released, video games couldn't just be ported over and needed to be recreated from the ground up. While they are technically by 21st century tongue textbook remakes, these types of recreations were known as conversions. And a prime example of a late 1900s conversion is none other than the hit video game Colossal Cave Adventure. Colossal Cave Adventure from 1976 and expanded on 1977 was a text-based adventure game where the player ventured through a variety of open and enclosed spaces, all presented to you through paragraphs of text which you could interact with by typing in commands. The game even scolds you for swearing. Due to this form of gaming becoming outdated really fast, as graphic design was starting to advance in the actually comprehensive visual field, a remake, but more accurately graphical adaptation of Colossal Cave Adventure was created in 1980 that was just called Adventure. To be frank, Adventure was goated and had a lot to offer. With the addition of surprisingly interactive game mechanics like a working magnet, key system, and enemies that still moved off screen that could also die to your sword even if you didn't have it in your hands. And to think Adventure sold half the copies of E-T. I jest. But despite Adventure being a project made to bring the magic of Colossal Cave Adventure to life, it's actually quite different and much more stripped down, which is only natural considering the fact that it's trying to adapt a text-based adventure game with the graphics of your own imagination. So trying to adapt that to hardware from 1977 is like if 500 people tried to make a space RPG that featured 1,000 planets. Just one in, even a simpleton like you should know that Adventure isn't really a good example of a raw conversion. It's pretty much a heavily inspired remake that ended up becoming its own project. Why do I always think about this stuff when I'm already knee-deep in the editing stage? Outside of Adventure, when I say the word conversion, I'm talking about when a team of developers need to alter a game's source code to run on a different machine, not the physical conversion of an arcade cabinet, which can be confusing considering both types of video game conversions happened a lot around the same time. But the era of source code conversions was interesting because these ports ended up falling into the demake category, as arcade machines were usually more powerful than home consoles like the Atari 2600. So conversions like Pac-Man, Frogger, and like I showed earlier, Donkey Kong and Space Invaders were visually inferior to their arcade predecessors. However, putting aside all of this information, Adventure as a loose remake set the framework for what a video game recreation should try to accomplish. It should take in what the original did well and why it appealed to its audience and try to expand that while still using the new technological tools at its disposal to reinvent itself as a product with the goal of ideally being a more enjoyable alternative to most people. Now I'm sure if Instagram Reel comment sections and Reddit existed in the 1980s, there would be a wave of people saying that Adventure is pixel slop and spit on what Colossal Cave Adventure tried to accomplish, but I think it's pretty good. There are three kinds of video game recreations: the remaster, the remaster, and the remake. There's also reimaginings, but in this video I'm going to be using remake as an umbrella term to refer to them as well. They also do definitely fit into the remake category. But to kick this whole discussion off, it's important that we start by understanding the ethics of a video game remaster. And ironically, even though remasters take significantly less effort to produce than a remake, they're sometimes all it takes to make a good game great, but on the contrary, can be the most wicked, most AI upscaled, bug-riddled pieces of iniquitous software that ever hit store shelves. I made this this chart to give you a simple idea on where a good and bad remaster lie. And if you disagree with it, feel free to voice that in the comments below and I will delete your comment. Also, this chart is a remaster. In real simple terms, for the people who don't know the difference, a remaster is an upgraded version of an original title. Whether that means higher resolution textures, a core engine upgrade that allows for things like ray tracing as we saw in GTA 5 Enhanced, or in some charitable cases, new game mechanics which really come in handy with janky old games that desperately need a modern controls mode. Not to say the modern controls mode for Tomb Raider Remastered doesn't still feel like a product of the 90s though. A remake, on the other hand, is a full-on recreation of a video game from the ground up, and it fits onto two spectrums, but I'll talk about that later. A lot of people say that it's a bad thing when a remake strays from its source material. I mean, I'm sure we've all heard somebody say it's not faithful to the original, but that's not always a bad thing. And remasters are just extremely tweaked remasters to the point where they could be considered or confused for remakes. To remaster a game is to thoroughly understand a video game's intended art direction, so you can only push it forward on modern platforms. Games age, even ones praised for their visual quality, eventually show signs of generational limitations. Like, why are shadows clipping at the edge of my screen? And why is Arthur talking to Polygon Patrick? And why isn't this game fucking remastered yet? So when a remaster can fix janky visuals that don't make sense on modern hardware, it's great. Wind Waker HD is a fantastic representation of what a prime remaster looks like. Wind Waker's art style was never trying to do more than it was doing on the GameCube, so all Nintendo had to do to make the game more appealing was use the originally drawn textures that had to be compressed for the GameCube version. So if that's all Nintendo did, then why do I consider Wind Waker HD to be the best remaster of all time? Well, that's because I'm biased, but also, for 2/3 of the original Wind Waker, it plays like any traditional Zelda game. Link's the chosen hero, and while pursuing his destiny, he meets a wide cast of quirky characters. And the campaign brilliantly subverts the player's expectations until you beat the 7th dungeon. I want you to imagine somebody that you hate with every fiber of your being, and I need you to trust me when I tell you, I hate Triforce Quest more. After clearing the 7th dungeon, Link needs to find 8 shards of the Triforce to enter the final battle. But before he finds 8 shards, he needs to find 8 encrypted maps that lead to the shards. Getting the Triforce charts is actually really enjoyable Zelda content. Each explorable area that's hiding a chart has its own unique gimmick, and is exactly what a Force story-driven quest should look like. The big fork in progression is that each map is encrypted, so Link needs to pay 398 rupees per map translation, settling at a steep total of 3,184 rupees. If you're not a competitive Wind Waker sweat, you probably won't have that many rupees by the time Triforce Quest comes around, so not only are you gonna have to find 8 charts, but you'll also have to grind up enough of a bank account to translate those 8 charts. As for the shards themselves, each of them boil down to going to where they are on each respective chart and pulling them out of the water. This part of the game is weird. It happens right before the final battle, and up until Triforce Quest, major story events that keep things interesting happen back to back, but all of a sudden the pacing gets thrown way off course for the sake of this unreasonably long fetch quest. So what happened? Wind Waker was rushed out the wazoo so Nintendo could get the game on store shelves by the holiday season of 2002. So there's a behemoth of cut content for this game, like plans for Link to age throughout the story, an island that would be shaped like a GameCube, a water temple that ended up getting replaced with a cutscene, and a fire and ice temple that was supposed to take place immediately after the Wind Temple, where the Triforce Quest is. So basically, instead of delaying the game, they replaced 2 whole dungeons with a lengthy fetch quest that would take up around the same time as those 2 dungeons would have. I knew this quote didn't come from Miyamoto. Wind Waker on GameCube is a quarter pounder with a big fucking apple in the middle of it. To this day, I still remember how I felt 12 years ago knowing that I was about to beat my favorite game, and just the thought of it ending absolutely destroyed me. But after I realized that the next 5 hours was going to be 16 What's Under Kakashi's Masks, it ruined my life. Wind Waker HD cuts down a lot of the 2002-ness of Wind Waker's game mechanics. No more watching Link replay the same song you just played in an unskippable cutscene. No more swapping out the sail every time you enter or leave your boat. And most importantly, no more overwhelming gap. The Wind Waker HD Triforce Quest is reworked so that instead of 8 charts in need of translation, it's 3. And where the other other 5 charts would have been in the original game is replaced with actual Triforce shards, which makes them fun to find like the charts were in the original game, and it significantly cuts down game length so that there's more consistent real game time. Wind Waker HD is better than the original in every single way, and that's what a remaster should strive to do, not change the game, but fix what can still be fixed and set itself up to be the objectively superior version. And if you haven't played Wind Waker yet, please do yourself a favor and purchase it on your legally owned Nintendo home console. But with older games with graphics that don't age as well as Wind Waker, it's kind of hard to remaster them without giving them a full-on remake. Which is why I respect retro game remasters that embrace themselves as old school and try to build off of the technological quirks that keep them charming today, like how the Quake characters are actually on crack and have you moving light speed across every level, but the old school run and gun pacing that Quake has is mostly what makes it still original and still fun to play because it's different. So there's no reason to change that. With Quake and Doom, you're still playing a 90s video game, but you're also playing it at 144 frames per second with fast load times and controls that don't feel clunky. So when games put themselves in a position to still be playable while maintaining their original identity, I think that's really cool. Old graphics really don't matter as long as the gameplay is responsive. Halo, Doom, and Quake prove this. And hell, sometimes when a project as small as a remaster tries to accomplish something as ambitious as a visual overhaul, it actually does the opposite of making the graphics better and just claps the art direction instead. Half-Life Source, for example, was a remaster of Half-Life that was meant to run in the Source engine to show off the engine's power before Half-Life 2's launch. As a demonstration of the Source engine's new features, it's pretty cool, but as a standalone game, the visuals aren't consistent at all. The guns and certain surfaces are really shiny, which contradicts Half-Life's dry brown aesthetic, and sure, the water looks really good, but compared to the low-resolution textures and other water effects connecting to the water surfaces like an office complex, it just doesn't really make sense. Another common theme with remasters that try to overhaul their OG game's graphics is that the developers will be so focused on making each scene look fresh and technologically impressive that they'll gloss over the intention behind how certain areas are supposed to look. In Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary and Tomb Raider Remastered, new players might find it really hard to progress because on the old graphics, new places where the players are supposed to explore are clearly better lit than the less important spots. But with the remaster graphics, it all just blends together. Fortunately though, these games in specific let you switch from old to new graphics in the click of a button. That said, aside from my grifting, I like remasters to be honest, especially ones like Skyrim that let people who owned the previous versions get the upgraded one for free. Shout out to GTA 5 Enhanced too while we're at it. Remasters can be a cash grab, but they also do give you an excuse to replay a game you already know and like, and most of the time it comes with better controls and graphics. But sometimes... Sorry about the change of clothes. I spilled ketchup on the striped shirt while I was eating a hot dog, so it's in the wash right now. But sometimes a rotting corpse wearing the skin of a game loved by many releases for the sake of getting a quick buck off of people's nostalgia. San Andreas for the Xbox 360. And it's up for debate. But it might just be the worst remaster of all time. Similar to a very infamous remaster and created by the same people actually, San Andreas Anniversary Edition replaced the original version of San Andreas on the Xbox Store. And on top of that, was only available as an Xbox Live exclusive through the arcade, and this all happened in 2014. But because it was a remaster celebrating 10 years of one of Rockstar's best-selling games of all time, you'd imagine the graphics would have gotten some improvements, taking advantage of the Xbox 360's stronger performance capabilities. Well, the funny thing about San Andreas' performance on the Xbox 360 is that not only was it noticeably worse than the original Xbox or PlayStation 2 version of the game, but it also looked worse, and like the characters were action figures due to the strange gloss effect on their models, and the fact that their anniversary versions had fully modeled fingers, but still the same animations as the original game, so the fingers weren't rigged to move at all and look really off-putting in certain scenes. But who cares if the art direction is inconsistent? As a YouTuber known for high-energy Fortnite gameplay that often showcases cracked high-level mechanics, montages, and tips for improvement, I only care if the immersion, the gameplay of a video game is enticing. Oh! Oh no! Something diabolical about this version of San Andreas is that there is a major game-breaking bug in the campaign that has still not been patched. During the flight school missions, where typically you have to watch a preview and learn how to operate an aircraft vehicle before doing it yourself, if you don't immediately start mashing the A button to skip the preview during flight school missions, your game will crash and you'll need to restart. Definitely a lot of strange additions in the celebration of San Andreas. And to end this talking point with the cherry on top, this version of GTA San Andreas isn't even a remaster of the 6th generation copy. It's a port of the mobile version. This is kind of the dark side of remasters. Because while some companies will use the opportunity to flesh out their game for more modern hardware, other companies will just do this. Hell, Plants vs. Zombies Replanted is a remaster that's only goal was to bring Plants vs. Zombies into HD, and instead of using EA's infinite money to properly redraw the sprites, or even giving them a more diverse library of expressions and animations like Persona 5 Royal did, which is very appreciated when it's a game that has you looking at sprites for almost the entire playthrough, they used AI to upscale all the assets and are selling it for $20. Sometimes I think the word remaster is just too obscure for its own good. Plants vs. Zombies Replanted mainly exists because the original game isn't on modern platforms, so the developers upscaled the resolution, added a few New Game Plus modes, and charged 6 times the price of the Game of the Year edition from 2010. The Witcher 3 gets a free update that features a bajillion different graphical enhancements and a small sum of new content, but it's just a port of The Witcher 3. Which is why I believe that a remaster specifically qualifies as a game that not only accomplishes the bare minimum of getting a game to run on modern platforms with basic graphical and performance improvements, but also adds a noticeable change to the actual experience that separates it enough to be identified as its own iteration that's clearly different from its predecessor. Like how The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered added a whole new roguelike game mode, which is super fun because it gives you and other players a reason to compete and continue basking in The Last of Us 2's immaculate combat system even after clearing the game. It's a great addition for returning players. Wind Waker overhauling the Triforce quest and a handful of other game mechanics, again, a great reason for somebody who's beaten the game to play it again. Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered. Something about this isn't right. But these aren't what people get super hyped about when it comes to the topic of remasters. And remakes are coming out left and right these days, and there's a lot of debate on what qualifies as a good remake. Is it loyal to the original? Does it differ in ways that make it better? Should the game in question have been remade at all? Remakes not only fit onto one spectrum, but two spectrums. The one on top being how loyal it is to its source material, and the one on the bottom being creative drive. Sometimes, even though a game is older, its game mechanics still hold up, and the only real handicap stopping it from destroying sales charts is its outdated visuals and maybe controls, and personally, I think these games deserve a remake if they're that good. Persona 3 Reload is extremely similar to the initial PlayStation 2 version, but what makes it the superior way to play the anime RPG is improvements like the ability to control your teammates during combat like in Persona 5, and reanimated cutscenes that are more than just 3 drawings and, I don't know, a camera pin or something. Thankfully, because Persona 3's exciting gameplay is 80% of the time reading, they didn't have to introduce timeline-altering elements that completely separates it from Persona 3 on PS2 because the old story wasn't as deep as it could have been due to technological limitations or something like that, like how Final Fantasy VII Remake story is completely different than the 1997 version. Because Persona 3's campaign and gameplay style still holds up. So if it's true that Persona 3 Reload is the same narrative as Persona 3 from the Victorian era, then why is it 15 hours shorter? That's because Atlus realized maybe gamers don't enjoy the mental anguish of grinding a repetitive combat system on top of punishing mechanics like fatigue. Other than the quality of life and visual changes, it still is to the core Persona 3. It's the same story, songs, kind of, and genre, but modernized in all the right ways so that a new crowd can enjoy the anime RPG it was always meant to be. Not that it wasn't an anime RPG before, I guess it just feels more like an actual interactive anime now. I mean, just look at how expressive these characters are. This is what a faithful remake with the perfect amount of creative drive looks like. It really makes you reflect on the basic Shin Megami Tensei Persona 3 and think, wow, it did kind of need this. You know what other piece of video game media from 2006 got a remake in the last 5 years? Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, and it too is a faithful remake. But even Satan believes in God. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl on Switch are the ultimate example of how sometimes it's just better to expand on something rather than try and do it again one-to-one. The versions of the games from 2006 use a distinct pixel art look paired with actual 3D models that blend in to add some depth to the visuals without exploding the DS and its 4 precious megabytes of RAM. The accomplishment of the imagery in these games is one thing, but something the minimalistic graphics actually did to hide the fact that it's a handheld game with a heap load of limitations was that it didn't look out of place when certain sprites did nothing but stand stand still. With the new 3D chibi art style, the motionless characters are clearly in a constant state of death until their god awakes them once again so they can fulfill their purpose of being an anti-sentient Game Freak NPC. Graphics should be upgraded. Give me all the graphics, but you can't just do a complete visual overhaul without overhauling almost everything else to flesh out the new aesthetic details. A lot of people were upset that they didn't add any of the upgrades from the other 4th gen Pokemon title, Pokemon Platinum, and instead left Diamond and Pearl with all the flaws that the original games had, like a serious lack in Pokemon variety and a smaller map. Also, these remakes were made in Unity. Guys! I understand people's attachment to older games, but I think it's important to understand that a lot of these games that people have nostalgic attachment to just won't have the same effect on somebody who's playing the game for the very first time in 2026. I mean, I've had real human beings on Instagram defend Persona 3 Portable, confidently stating that's the superior way to play the game. You know what though? Those are the best people to debate this with, because then you can just pull the, well, you can't romance an 11-year-old and reload, and then they have to back down, but then you remember that they're Persona fans, so then they defend that too. If somebody with a PS5 who mostly plays 9th gen console games goes to the original Persona 3, they most likely won't feel a lot of drive to get involved with these characters' stories, since these characters, by 2026 standard, barely pass as humans. And again, I'm not saying it's impossible. I certainly enjoy a healthy variety of video games, but that's also because I grew up with games that looked like this. But yeah, I think it's cool when remakes try to innovate within the field of staying true to their inspirations. And this is where remasters come in handy as well. I love Oblivion. Great game. I still remember watching my older cousin play it on his Xbox 360, knowing full well I should not be witnessing this violent, depraved video game. But if somebody wants to play Oblivion and they ask me which version to play, there's no way in hell I'm telling them to play the original. The Remaster, which ports Oblivion to Unreal Engine 5, making it both a remake and a remaster, completely fixes the floaty movement from the original, overhauls the animations, makes the world more reactive, and improves the technical hiccups that the old version has, but leaves the funny, beloved jank that makes Oblivion. But a remake sticking to its source material's bones is pretty much what decides a remake's value, according to the troglodyte hive mind that is r/video games. But personally, I don't think that a remake has to be loyal to the original to be good. Sometimes it's really good for one piece of art to bounce off of another, so they can coexist as their own cool visions of the same concept. And I'm a fan of taking an idea that already worked and morphing it into something else that can stand on its own feet. People often praise the original Final Fantasy VII for its storytelling, but the remakes are able to earn their own reputation as a series without even having the same campaign as the 90s classic. The gameplay, for example, is, and I'm sorry for Final Fantasy lifers that are watching this video, but the gameplay in the remake slam dunks the original, and it's not even close. No matter how 10 out of 10 a game is, traditional turn-based combat is traditional turn-based combat. Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat is so fun because it blends the strategy of turn-based combat with the interaction and joy of actual gameplay, and it's chef's kiss from a JRPG standpoint. And with the PlayStation 4's graphical capabilities and a lot of clever optimization strategies, the dystopian setting of Midgar is really visually threatening and convincing. It's a very overwhelming place, and in my opinion, it makes it easier to relate to the characters' motives of terrorism, and overall makes the expeditions more fun because they actually feel like there are high stakes on the table. And on the topic of remakes that benefited from selectively separating themselves from the original, I'm not gonna pass up the opportunity to talk about if Silent Hill 2 was a one-to-one remake of the 2001 classic, a lot of issues would come from not making a few fundamental changes. Horror games are supposed to be off-putting and uncomfortable, and in the original Silent Hill 2, the dungeons, or areas, I guess you could call them, are pretty short. You can beat each of them in less than half an hour, and as for the enemies, it's pretty easy to run past them or just spam the X button where James will hit them over the head and they'll have no way to attack you since James' bonk attack stuns them. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. The game came out in 2001, and for a 2001 game, it's an excellent horror title. And most of the charm comes from the atmosphere, which Silent Hill 2 on the PlayStation 2 captures brilliantly. Something I love about the old Silent Hill trilogy is that it runs with this analog horror before analog horror was cool designed to drive home its eerie tone. And I just don't think that modern survival horror can really go there anymore with the way that third-person shooters are crafted now. But while the style of the older Silent Hill games are certainly iconic, I wouldn't say they still hold up as edge-of-your-seat, poop-in-your-pants scary. What is scary is navigating these massive buildings with so many little grotesque details and competent enemies that will make you uncomfortable and will make you scared not to lose the 20 minutes of progress you've cleared since your last save. The same point stands for Resident Evil 2 Remake. Like Silent Hill 2, Resident Evil 2 Remake swapped out the claustrophobic fixed camera angles from the original game for an over-the-shoulder perspective, along with throwing tank controls out the window. It's a very responsive game to play, and because they overhauled the puzzles, it's even replayable for the people who have the original game burned into their hippocampus. Hearing Mr. X's intense foot stomps moving towards you and then having to solve puzzles while evading him is gaming cinema at its finest. And this awesome experience wouldn't have been possible if they just left Resident Evil 2 as a classic horror game. A lot of the time, great ideas deserve to be brought back because with modern tech, elements that couldn't be explored to the fullest in the past can be revitalized and pushed to what the artists actually intended instead of having it be interpreted. But even with this huge list of reasons why remakes are good and why they should exist, a lot of people believe that this entire generation is remakes and game developers should start making original ideas again. But it's really not as bad as people make it out to be. In 2025, 2024, 2023, 2022, 2021, and 2020, plenty of brand new titles came out that were really well received. And gaming, as much as people who apparently love gaming hate to believe, is still innovating on what hasn't been done before. And you could say, well, back in the PlayStation 2, there were a ton of games, but that does not mean they were all good. The era that we're in right now is an interesting one, where indie devs are all over the place, making fun games where one of them conquers the internet for a few months, and every AAA studio, every good AAA studio, is trying to make the best, biggest, most amazing game ever, which has resulted in a ton of jaw-dropping, grand-scale video game projects that still stand tall to this day because of the amount of time it took to make them. But with that time comes waiting, and this is where remakes become a completely rational decision for game studios. Fill that gap with something people already love, but expand on it to bring in new players. And on a somewhat unrelated but related note, people love to act like games taking a lot of time to be made is a bad thing, but there are plenty of reasons for this. The most obvious being to avoid crunch, which has been a big issue in the past, and still is an issue today, to be fair. But people tend to forget that companies exist for the sake of making money, and new IPs make money. Bethesda isn't just sitting around doing nothing. Yeah, Elder Scrolls 6 is taking a really long time, but even though Starfield flopped, I'm glad that they tried something new instead of sticking with the same two universes. And yeah, GTA 6 isn't out yet, but I'm glad that Red Dead Redemption 2 was made. It's my favorite game of all time, and at least Rockstar still updates GTA 5 while people wait for their new game. And you know what? When both games come out, they'll probably be received really well because they weren't rushed out the door. I'm a big fan of companies that take time and do things right, and I'm also a big fan of taking advantage of modern technology. So in my opinion, make those big games, and most importantly, remake those projects that deserve to be remade. But what do you guys think? Do you like this trend of remakes? Do you want a specific game to be remade? And do you think that this will continue as gaming moves forward? Let me know in the comments below and I'll check them out as soon as I possibly can. As always, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch this video, and make sure to have a good one. And speaking of, whoa! No! I shot myself. I shot myself. What am I gonna do? How are you here? I thought I killed you. You shot me in the head, man. Holy shit. Remake me. I don't even know how much time I have. We don't have much time. Make things right. You're right. I'll redo it all. I'll remake you. I'll retake the life which is mine, like some kind of remaster.